Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. My name is Surina and I'm a surgical trainee, and if you've watched my recent videos you'll know that I recently received an offer for an ST3 job in general surgery as a registrar, and so I thought I would outline the application process and share my top tips and advice for each step of the process while it's still fresh in my mind. So first, to quickly outline how to become a surgeon in the UK, you graduate medical school, you do your foundation years, your F1 and F2 in a variety of different specialities. Then if you want to become a surgeon, you apply for core surgical training, which is 2 years as well, CT1 and CT2. That's what I'm doing right now, and I've spent the last 2 years rotating in different surgical specialities. You then decide which surgical speciality you want to specialize in, and you apply for ST3 or higher level speciality training within that subspeciality, and that's what I've just gone through and applied for general surgery. That will then be from ST3 to ST8, so 6 years, and then after that you can become a surgical consultant. The ST3 application is quite a bottleneck in this whole process. There are far more applicants than there are jobs, as there are at every step, to be honest, but this is a particularly tight bottleneck, and so competition levels are pretty high. And of course it's difficult to get the job you want or the location you want. So let's go through the elements of the ST3 application process. Simply put, it is made up of a portfolio, which is scored out of 120 points, and then the interview, if you shortlist for one, is also made out of 120 points. Your scores for both of these are combined, and that determines your overall rank of how you've performed nationally. The timeline for this whole process is quite lengthy and can be a bit confusing, but the MediBuddy website has a really good condensed version of the timeline, so I'll go through that quickly here. Essentially, this is what's happened in my year, the year that's just gone by, but it's pretty similar year to year. The applications open in November time. They remain open for a few weeks, and then in December they close. At this point you can start uploading your evidence for your portfolio. The evidence upload window is from mid-December to mid-January. So you've got until then to get last minute things done. I was doing things all the way up till the deadline, so you have got that extra month where the window is open to keep getting more points. Your portfolio scores are released at some point in January, February time. The invites to interview this year were given towards the end of February, and then the interviews themselves were in mid-March. The initial offers came out by mid-April, and then further iterations of offers come out for the next couple of weeks to months after that. So it all kind of runs from November to roughly April time. Sorry, my neighbours are being very loud building something in their garden, so excuse the random building noises if you can hear them. So now let's go through the steps of this process, which I've divided into the 3 Ps: the preparation, the portfolio, and the presentation, aka the interview, but that didn't begin with P, so presentation it is. And I will be sharing my top tips and advice for each of these sections, but they will be all timestamped below if you want to skip to whichever section is most relevant for you at this time. This video is going to be part of what I think will be a mini-series for the ST3 applications, because there is so much more that I want to share with you about interview preparation and go into more detail than I can in one video alone. So do subscribe if that's something that you think might be useful for you in the future. I'm also planning to run a interview-focused workshop later on in the year, closer to the next application cycle. So if you think you'll be applying and think that might be useful, then sign up to register your interest in the link in the description box below. So, preparation. Fail to prepare, prepare to fail. So I would suggest looking at all the relevant paperwork as early as possible. I wish I'd done this earlier during my core surgical training, because it really allows you to prepare for the next couple of years in a lot more of a sustainable manner. So before you start, make sure you are eligible to apply for ST3 training by checking out the person specification documents on the NHS England website, which I will link below. In short, there are a few criteria you need to meet to be applicable. Number 1, you need a medical degree, MBBS or equivalent. Number 2, you need to have passed both parts of the MRCS, Part A and Part B, by the time you start your ST3 training. So of course you can do that within your core surgical training, just have to have passed by the time ST3 starts. You also need to be eligible for full registration with the GMC and hold a license to practice with them. And finally, you need to have your full employment history and evidence of all the relative competencies that you need to be a surgical registrar, whether that's all your competencies signed off for core surgical training, or if you've gone through an alternative pathway, then evidence of all your competencies through the CREST pathway. There may be alternative equivalents if you are an international graduate, but as I'm not one myself, I don't know the details and ins and outs of all of the specific iterations of that. So make sure you look them up specifically for what's relevant to you. For ST3 applications are very explicitly written in the application handbook, which I would recommend reading cover to cover more than once. It will answer basically most of the questions you'll have about the whole application process, and it's really important to get your head around these earlier rather than later. I will link this year's one below, but be mindful it may change slightly year to year, so make sure you look up the most recent one applicable to you. There are 7 questions that you have to answer for the portfolio and that you get points for. Number 1, the number of months in general surgery post-foundation job. Number 2, the number of non-surgical jobs you have done more than 4 months in. Number 3, the number of appendicectomies that you've performed at STS or above. Number 4, your best 2 publications. Number 3, your best 2 presentations. Number 6, your best 2 QIP or audits, plus 1 additional QIP or audit. And finally, any additional degrees at number 7. I cannot stress this enough, but make sure you really read carefully what you specifically score points for and what specific evidence you need. This part of the preparation takes the longest to gather, so the earlier you read this and have this criteria at the back of your mind, the more specific and focused your efforts can be to try and get your portfolio scores. So moving on to the second section, portfolio. This is the part of the application process you have the maximum control over, and so this is really where you want to maximize your score as much as possible. The portfolio is out of 120 points, and while there is no formal cutoff that I've seen released anywhere for how much you have to score to get an interview, anecdotally, talking around to colleagues and having a look at online forums, it looks like a rough cutoff might be between 60 to 65% in order to shortlist for an interview. So you really want to aim as high as possible to ensure you get that interview. Top tips to share in this section. Number 1, optimize for quality. I've listened to a few ST3 application talks now given by the people who design the application process, and they've all very much emphasized that the focus has shifted from quality over quantity of the work you've done. This means that your involvement and the impact of your work is now far more important than the number of projects you've done. This means for audits and presentations in particular, you need to maximize your involvement by making sure you are leading as many aspects of the project as possible, and you need to maximize the impact by making sure you're presenting it orally rather than a poster, or internationally or nationally rather than locally. And if you maximize these 2 components as much as you can, you will score much more highly. So for example, my partner did a great project in green surgery called Rub Don't Scrub, which was comparing alcohol-based hand rubbing and encouraging its use over the usual water-based hand washing to encourage saving time, energy, water, and money. It was a really simple project that audited what practices currently were. Most people were using hand washing. Then it implemented educational interventions to raise awareness about the alcohol-based rub and all of its benefits, and then re-audited to see if alcohol-based hand rub was being used more now. Now, not only was this a great project from a sustainability point of view and genuinely improved practice, but it was submitted for national and international conferences where it was presented orally, where it won prizes. I think this is such a great example of picking something really simple and straightforward to carry out, but then milking the hell out of it to maximize those involvement and impact metrics that the portfolio is specifically looking for. Number 2, start at the end. On that note, if you want to work smart and not hard, you really need to make sure that the work you do or plan to do will translate into actual points for the portfolio. One of the holes I often find myself falling down is getting really involved in a project, collecting lots of data, trying to make it into a presentation or a paper, but then realizing that actually the points it translates to doesn't really reflect how much hard work I put into it, because it didn't really hit those metrics that the portfolio was looking for. So to make sure your work earns its well-deserved points, a good tip I have is to start at the end. For example, it was getting close to the portfolio deadline and I realized that the audits I had done, I either hadn't had a big enough role in or they hadn't been presented anywhere international or national. And so there were lots of points I'd left on the table. I decided to start at the end by looking to see what conferences were coming up in the immediate next weeks to months. And I found that there was a national conference coming up in emergency surgery specifically, and it made me focus on thinking about emergency surgery specific audits with the aim and end intention to submit it to that specific conference. I could have just done any old random audit thinking, oh, I need audit points, and then realizing there was nowhere appropriate to submit it. So that would have been all of the hard work and not enough of the output. So that's why I really recommend finding the conference first. An extra tip in this section, because I often get asked how do you find audit topics, and it's something I struggle with a lot as well, is a bit of a convoluted way that I found audit inspiration by finding the British Journal of Surgery pages where they publish all of their submitted audits, and there are pages and pages of submitted audits which you can read through, get inspiration from the titles, have a read of the abstracts, and then think about how you could apply those topics to your hospital or trust or speciality. And so when I found my emergency surgery conference, I then looked at emergency surgery topics on the BJS and was able to find an appendicitis related audit that I could easily translate to my hospital. Number 3, go far together. I think I've shared this advice in pretty much every surgical application video I've ever made, but I think it deserves even more airtime because it is so incredibly useful. Working together will exponentially increase your ability to gain points. And yes, some people may think or say, well, you're in competition with each other and you don't want to give away points to other people. Trust me, for this process and most things in life, you will go so much further if you don't treat this like a zero-sum game where the winner takes it all, and realize that if you all work together, you will all win together, I promise you. So what did that look like for my colleagues and I? Well, we made sure we did all our projects and things together where we could, where we split the tasks between us to make sure we were both heavily involved, but that made it that we could get more done in a shorter amount of time. We also worked together to get our appendix numbers because you need 36 at STS or above. And based on our interpretation of STS, we both made sure we did half the operation at least, including the key steps, and then we were both able to count it for our numbers. And finally, we're on to the presentation, aka the interview. The interview is online and 40 minutes long. That is 15 minutes for a clinical question, 5 minutes reading and 10 minutes of answering the question. 15 minutes for a management question, again, 5 minutes of reading and 10 minutes of answering. And finally, 10 minutes of answering questions about your portfolio. My top tips for this section are as follows. Number 1, invest in resources. Now, I don't know about you, but I've often viewed spending money on extra resources as a bit unnecessary or a bit icky because there are so many free resources out there and you don't want to feel like you're paying for something that's already available for free. But I very much changed my way of thinking on this more recently, and when it comes to education or investing in yourself, then I really try not to think twice anymore about spending money because you will almost always have a good return on that kind of investment. And with this being the most important interview I've sat to date, I decided that it would be only a good thing to absorb as much information from as many different resources as possible. I know this isn't in everyone's ability to be able to afford. Surgical training is already so expensive with various exams and courses that you have to do. But if you can plan ahead and save up a bit, do some extra shifts, then this would be something really worth saving up for. In terms of books that I used, I mainly only used this one book called Cracking the General Surgery Interviews for ST3, which is what it says on the tin. It is written by some recent applicants, I believe, and so it's got really useful and up-to-date scenarios. But what I found particularly useful about this book were the answers. They really explored some very niche and specific points in long-term patient management, for example, that I didn't see covered anywhere else. So I found it really useful for that reason. Question banks, there are a few, which I'll put up on the screen right now. I used MediBuddy, as did most of my colleagues, but I'll be honest, this was a really useful resource acting as a sort of contents page for what kind of scenarios have come up in the past, and so used it as a guide for knowing what to know. But the answers I found were often very generic and not very specific. That's where I think other resources like that book were much stronger. But actually this question bank didn't give a lot of information for how to actually answer these questions. But in any case, it was a useful contents page to hang off all my learning from, and also very useful to do with colleagues, as there were ready-made scenarios built in there, so you could just sit down, open one up, and start practicing with a colleague pretty quickly. Courses, there were lots of advertised courses on Facebook, and if you just type in ST3 General Surgery courses online, there's quite a few that pop up. They can be pretty expensive. One that I did was the ACE medicine course, which was a bit on the pricey side, but actually I would say was very much worth it, because there was a lot of really useful pointers in there that I would not have thought about without the course. And there was plenty of opportunity to practice, which is so important for any courses that you look into. Make sure there's a component where you get to actually practice under exam conditions and get to hear other candidates practicing as well, because you pick up something different from everyone you listen to. So it's really good to hear lots of answers as well as say lots of answers. I also remember doing a course by Asset, which was very affordable and again, really good content. So I'd recommend looking out for that. My trust registrars also organized a fantastic course where registrars who'd recently gone through the process interviewed us. And so ask around your trust registrars as well to see if they are running anything similar. On that note, number 2 is to practice, practice, practice with everyone. As much as you can learn from reading and talking to yourself, I found practicing with a very wide range of colleagues was the most useful activity by far. Everyone has different styles and structures and ways of communicating, and you'll find the more exposure you have to different people's brains, the more golden nuggets you'll pick up and use to refine your own technique. And so really practice with as many people as you can. That is of course your colleagues that you are applying with, but also working up the chain, so finding registrars who've recently done the process themselves is very useful. More senior registrars and even consultants are very useful to practice with to really turn the pressure on. I remember closer to the time I was asking my consultants to quiz me in between cases, which was a bit more informal but definitely made me think of things I hadn't thought of before. But then I also did some sit down practice with a consultant, which by that time I'd done a lot of practice and felt fairly confident, but something about doing it with a senior who you work with every day and you really feel like you've got a lot to prove really amps up the pressure. And so that was such a stressful practice, but really, really good at replicating the exam conditions and pressure that you feel on the actual day. So yeah, I recommend practicing with everyone. And finally, think like an ST3. The most valuable insight I can give you for how to give really strong interview answers is to really start getting into the mindset of how you would actually act as an ST3 registrar. For example, when you are talking about prioritizing tasks, in real life you would often do many things simultaneously. So while you are going to assess the most unwell patient, on the way you can call a nurse and ask them to start doing observations and bedside investigations for another patient. You could talk to one of the juniors on your team and give them specific instructions for what to do to start solving another situation and to feed back to you when they've done it. So by the time you've reached the unwell patient that requires your attention, other things are happening at the same time. That's what you would do in real life, but you need to verbalize that in your answers as well to come across as someone who's very situationally aware and someone who knows how to multitask priorities in real life. Similarly, another example is when you're thinking about patient care, not just thinking about the short-term initial assessment and resuscitation that you would be performing if the patient is unwell, but also thinking about long-term management considerations, such as getting advice from other specialities, referring to the relevant MDTs, updating relatives and next of kins. These are the kind of things that you would do day in, day out, probably without thinking about it now, but so many people won't think to verbalize them in interview answers, and that is what really makes you stand out from other people and makes the interviewers realize that you are ready and prepared to be an ST3 level registrar. My advice for learning how to step up to ST3 level would be actually doing it at work. So offering to take the bleep from your registrar, accepting referrals from other teams, attending trauma calls, preparing patients for emergency operating, updating families, and talking to your consultants and other teams. Being able to do this in a supported environment with your actual registrar on hand for advice is such useful preparation, not just for the interview, but also to prepare you for your next step of training. So really get into that mindset in the months leading up to the interview. I could talk so much more about interview prep and technique, and to do that topic justice, that will require another video, which will be up closer to the next application cycle. So if that does apply to you, make sure you do subscribe. And like I mentioned at the beginning, I would love to share these tips in a dedicated workshop as well. So if that's something that would be useful for you, do sign up with the link in the description box below. So that is the process in a nutshell. If you found that useful, do check out these other videos on my channel. Feel free to leave any questions below and I will do my best to answer them, and I'll see you in a video soon. Bye!